The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of Meridian Tech's corporate headquarters as Sarah Chen stepped out of the elevator on the 32nd floor, her heels clicking against the polished marble with the same confident rhythm they had for the past 8 years. She carried her usual café au lait and wore her signature navy blazer, the one that had become synonymous with her presentations to the board. Today felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the way Marcus, the security guard, had avoided her eyes, or how Jennifer from accounting had quickly looked away when Sarah smiled at her in the lobby. Sarah had built Meridian Tech's entire digital transformation department from the ground up. What started as a small initiative to modernize their legacy systems had grown into a 60-person division responsible for 40% of the company's revenue growth over the past 3 years. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The Project Phoenix initiative, her brainchild, was set to launch in 6 weeks, promising to revolutionize how the company handled client data and potentially save millions in operational costs. She pushed open the door to her corner office, expecting to find her usual stack of project reports and the familiar hum of her team working in the adjacent open workspace. Instead, she found two figures waiting for her: Rebecca Walsh, the VP of Human Resources, and David Morrison, the Chief Operating Officer. Both wore expressions that belonged in a funeral parlor rather than a tech company. "Sarah, please sit down," Rebecca said, her voice unusually formal. "We need to discuss some serious matters that have come to our attention." The coffee cup felt suddenly heavy in Sarah's hands as she set it down on her desk. "What's this about?" David leaned forward, his face grave. "We've received credible allegations regarding Project Phoenix, specifically that you've been selling proprietary information to our competitors." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at them, waiting for the punchline, for someone to jump out and tell her this was an elaborate joke. "I'm sorry, what?" "Financial irregularities, unauthorized access to classified databases, communication with competitors. It's all documented," Rebecca continued, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "This is very serious, Sarah." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were bank statements showing deposits she'd never made, email printouts of conversations she'd never had, and access logs to systems she'd never touched outside of her authorized work. Her own face stared back at her from security footage dated just 3 days ago, apparently entering the building at 2 a.m. to access the central server room. Except she had been at her sister's wedding in Portland that entire weekend, with 200 witnesses and countless photos to prove it. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was in Portland this weekend. I have witnesses, photos, boarding passes." "Sarah," David interrupted, his tone suggesting tired patience with a child's excuses. "The evidence is overwhelming. We've been watching this situation develop for weeks. The board met this morning and made their decision." Rebecca pulled out another document. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and you have 48 hours to return any company property in your possession." The room spun around Sarah. 8 years. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, of skipped vacations to meet deadlines, of building something from nothing. "You're giving me 2 days? After everything I've done for this company?" "Given the severity of the allegations, we're being generous," Rebecca replied coolly. "You should consider yourself fortunate that we're not pressing criminal charges at this time." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Her reputation in the industry would be destroyed. Her team, her people who trusted her, would think she had betrayed them. The project that was supposed to be her legacy would launch without her, if it launched at all. "Who reported this?" she asked quietly. David and Rebecca exchanged glance. "That's not something we can discuss," David said. But Sarah had already noticed something in their exchange, something that made her stomach turn. She thought about the late nights she'd spent mentoring Tom Rodriguez, her deputy director, how she'd recommended him for promotion just last month, how he'd been asking increasingly detailed questions about Phoenix's security protocols, how he'd volunteered to handle the server maintenance last weekend while she was away. "It was Tom, wasn't it?" she said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Rebecca's carefully maintained neutral expression flickered for just a moment, long enough to confirm Sarah's suspicions. Tom Rodriguez had been with the company for 3 years, hired directly by Sarah when he was fresh out of MIT, with brilliant ideas but no real-world experience. She had taken him under her wing, taught him everything she knew about enterprise systems, and gradually given him more responsibility as he proved himself capable. He was charming, ambitious, and had a way of making everyone feel like they were his closest confidant. "I want to see the evidence properly examined," Sarah said, finding her voice again. "I want an independent investigation." "Sarah," David's voice carried a note of finality, "this decision isn't up for debate. Security is waiting outside to escort you out." The walk through the office was a blur of shocked faces and whispered conversations. Her team, people she'd hired, trained, and worked alongside for years, watched in stunned silence as security officers flanked her to the elevator. She caught Tom's eye across the room. He was standing near her office door, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. The expression she saw there was one of cold calculation, not the surprise and concern he was performing for their colleagues. In that moment, Sarah understood. Tom hadn't just stolen her work and framed her for corporate espionage. He had systematically positioned himself as her natural successor, gained access to all her systems and contacts, and orchestrated her downfall with the precision of a chess master. The fake evidence would be nearly impossible to disprove quickly, and by the time she could mount a defense, he would be firmly established in her role. The security guards walked her to her car in the parking garage. As she sat behind the wheel, hands shaking too much to start the engine, Sarah felt the weight of the injustice crushing down on her. She had given everything to this company, to these people, and in return, she had been discarded based on fabricated evidence from someone she had trusted completely. Over the next 48 hours, Sarah methodically returned company property while simultaneously gathering evidence of her innocence. She contacted the hotel in Portland, obtained time-stamped photos from the wedding, and compiled a detailed timeline that would prove her whereabouts during the alleged crimes. But even as she built her case, she knew the damage was spreading. Her industry contacts began responding to her calls with uncomfortable politeness, or not at all. Word traveled fast in the tech world, and the narrative was already being written. Sarah Chen, the once promising executive who had been caught selling secrets. She could practically hear the whispered conversations at industry mixers and conference happy hours on the second evening as she packed the last of her personal items from her home office. Sarah's phone rang. It was Janet Liu, her former mentor, and now CTO at a competing firm. "Sarah, I heard what happened." Janet's voice was careful, measured. "I wanted to reach out personally. Janet, I need you to know." "I believe you," Janet interrupted quietly. "I've known you for 12 years. You're many things. Obsessive, perfectionist, sometimes ruthlessly focused. But you're not a thief, and you're too smart to leave such an obvious trail if you were." The relief Sarah felt at hearing those words nearly brought her to tears. "Thank you. I was beginning to think I was going crazy. What are you going to do?" Sarah looked out her apartment window at the city lights, at the building where Meridian Tech's offices glowed in the distance. "I'm going to prove my innocence, and I'm going to rebuild. That's going to take time, maybe years. I know." What Sarah didn't know was that karma had already begun its work. Tom Rodriguez was riding high on his successful coup. Within a week of Sarah's termination, he had been promoted to Sarah's former position as Director of Digital Transformation. The board praised his alertness to security threats and his commitment to company integrity. Project Phoenix was moving forward under his leadership, and he had successfully positioned himself as the architect of its innovations. But Tom had made a crucial error in his calculations. In his eagerness to claim credit for Sarah's work, he had failed to fully understand the intricate systems she had designed. Sarah's true genius hadn't been in the flashy presentations or high-level strategy. It had been in the subtle, interconnected details that made everything work seamlessly together. The first crack appeared 2 weeks after Sarah's departure. The Phoenix Systems authentication module began generating random errors during routine testing. Tom assured the team it was a minor glitch that could be easily resolved. However, the errors weren't random at all. Sarah had built the system with multiple redundancies and fail-safes that worked in harmony. When Tom tried to modify her original architecture to put his own stamp on it, he unknowingly disrupted these carefully balanced relationships. The second problem emerged when Tom tried to present the Phoenix project to Meridian Tech's biggest client, Hartwell Industries. The demo that should have been a triumphant validation of his leadership instead became a disaster. The system crashed 3 times during the presentation, data synchronization failed, and the client interface displayed what could only be described as gibberish. "This is not what we agreed to," Hartwell's CEO said coldly, as the third system restart failed to resolve the display issues. "We were promised a robust, enterprise-grade solution. This looks like a college student's coding project." Tom scrambled to explain, sweat visible on his forehead, as he tried to manually fix the errors in real time. But without understanding Sarah's underlying architecture, his attempts to repair the system only made things worse. The meeting ended with Hartwell threatening to terminate their contract, a deal worth $47 million over 3 years. Rebecca Walsh watched the disaster unfold from the back of the conference room. She had been the one to convince the board that Tom's allegations against Sarah were credible, largely based on her assessment of his character and potential. Seeing him flounder so completely in what should have been his moment of triumph sent a chill of doubt through her carefully maintained confidence. Meanwhile, Sarah had not been idle. Working from her apartment with equipment she purchased herself, she had spent 3 weeks reverse engineering her own systems. Not to steal them, but to prove how they actually worked. In the process, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. The fabricated evidence against her contained a fatal flaw. The access logs showed her badge being used to enter the server room at 2:15 a.m. on the Saturday of her sister's wedding. However, the logs also showed the same badge being used to access a different secured area at 2:22 a.m. the same night. The two locations were 8 minutes apart by elevator and security corridor, but 15 minutes apart if you had to walk the route, which was the only way to move between them during the night shift when the express elevators were locked down. More importantly, the person accessing these areas would have needed Sarah's badge, her biometric data, and her supervisor-level password. While badges could be cloned and passwords could be stolen, biometric data required physical presence, unless someone had administrative access to the security system itself. Sarah's investigation led her to an uncomfortable truth. The fabricated evidence hadn't been created by Tom alone. He had needed help from someone with high-level access to multiple corporate systems. Someone who could modify security logs, create fake financial records, and coordinate the timing of the evidence discovery. The answer came to her at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, as she cross-referenced the dates of the fabricated evidence with the company's executive calendar. Every piece of fake evidence had been created during windows when Rebecca Walsh had been working late in the HR department, times when she had legitimate access to the security and financial systems that would have been required to create such convincing forgeries. Rebecca hadn't just been complicit in Tom's scheme, she had been his partner. Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned by the scope of the betrayal. Rebecca had been with Meridian Tech for 12 years, had been Sarah's HR partner on dozens of projects, had even attended Sarah's birthday parties. The two women had shared lunches, discussed career strategies, and Sarah had even recommended Rebecca for her current promotion. But as Sarah thought back over their interactions, patterns began to emerge. Rebecca had always been resentful of Sarah's rapid rise through the company. She had made subtle comments about Sarah being lucky to be in tech during the diversity push, had questioned whether Sarah was really qualified for her promotions, and had consistently tried to steer Sarah towards staff roles rather than line management positions. The partnership with Tom made perfect sense. Rebecca provided the access and administrative cover, while Tom provided the technical knowledge and the narrative to make the frame job believable. Together, they could eliminate Sarah and position Tom for rapid advancement that would likely benefit Rebecca as his ally and enabler. Sarah spent another week meticulously documenting the evidence of the conspiracy. She created a timeline that showed the pattern of after-hours access, cross-referenced the fabricated evidence with the access logs, and identified the specific systems that would have been required to create the false records. When she was finished, she had a case that would not only clear her name but expose the real criminals. But before she could decide how to proceed, karma escalated its intervention. The Phoenix project was now 3 weeks behind schedule and hemorrhaging credibility. Tom's attempts to fix the underlying problems had created new issues, and the system was becoming increasingly unstable. The development team, many of whom had been hired and trained by Sarah, were beginning to voice concerns about the new direction. "Tom, I don't understand why we're changing the core authentication module," said Lisa Park, Sarah's former lead developer. "Sarah's design was working perfectly in testing." "We need to modernize the approach," Tom replied tersely, though he couldn't articulate what specific improvements his changes were supposed to provide. "But your modifications are causing the synchronization errors," pressed Mike Chen, another senior developer. "If we revert to Sarah's original architecture, the system stabilizes immediately." Tom's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Sarah is no longer with this company for good reason. We're not going backward to accommodate her outdated methodologies." The team exchanged glances. They had all been shocked by Sarah's sudden termination, and many had privately questioned the allegations against her. Seeing Tom struggle with systems that Sarah had designed flawlessly was raising uncomfortable questions about the official narrative. The situation reached a breaking point during a crucial client demonstration for Morrison Industries, another major account. Tom had assured management that the system issues had been resolved and that the demo would proceed smoothly. Instead, the Phoenix system crashed within minutes of beginning the presentation, corrupted the test data, and somehow sent automated emails to everyone in the client's address book with jumbled code fragments. Morrison's IT director stared at his phone, which was buzzing with confused calls from his colleagues who had received the spam emails. "Mr. Rodriguez, this system just sent random code to our entire executive team, including our competitors, who are on our industry council. We're going to have to assume our data has been compromised." "That's impossible," Tom stammered, frantically trying to access the system logs. "This is just a minor display issue." "Minor?" Morrison's CEO stood up, her face cold with fury. "Your system just potentially exposed our confidential information to our competitors. We're terminating this contract immediately and considering legal action for damages." As Morrison's team filed out of the conference room, Tom found himself facing David Morrison, Rebecca Walsh, and 3 other executives. The silence was deafening. "Tom," David's voice was carefully controlled, "we need to talk." The emergency executive meeting lasted 4 hours. Tom tried to explain that the problems were temporary, that he just needed more time to optimize Sarah's original designs. But his explanations only highlighted how little he actually understood about the systems he had claimed to have co-designed. "You told us you were instrumental in developing Phoenix," David said quietly. "You assured us that Sarah was taking credit for work that was primarily yours." Tom's throat felt dry. "The systems are more interconnected than I initially realized." "Tom," Rebecca interrupted, and Sarah would have been shocked to hear the genuine concern in her voice. "The Morrison incident could cost us their account and potentially trigger liability claims. We need to understand exactly what went wrong." What had gone wrong was that Tom had tried to modify code he didn't understand to fix problems he had created by previous modifications he didn't understand. It was a cascading failure that Sarah could have resolved in an afternoon, but Tom's pride had prevented him from admitting his incompetence until it was too late. Meanwhile, Sarah had made her decision about how to proceed with her evidence. Rather than going directly to Meridian Tech's management, who had already proven they wouldn't listen to her, she decided to approach the situation differently. She contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division. Agent Maria Santos had been investigating corporate fraud for 8 years, and she recognized the pattern immediately when Sarah presented her case. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated, but not perfect, and the conspiracy between Tom and Rebecca had left digital fingerprints throughout Meridian Tech's systems. "Ms. Chen, this is a serious allegation: corporate fraud, identity theft, computer crimes. If your evidence is accurate, we're looking at federal felonies." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "I didn't want it to come to this, but they destroyed my career and reputation. I need it documented officially that I was innocent." Agent Santos spent 2 weeks independently verifying Sarah's evidence. The FBI's computer forensics team confirmed that the security logs had been altered, the financial records had been fabricated, and the email communications had been created using administrative access to Meridian Tech servers. More importantly, they identified the specific user accounts and timestamps associated with creating the false evidence. The pattern was clear. Rebecca Walsh had used her HR administrative access to create the fabricated records during late-night sessions when the office was empty, while Tom Rodriguez had provided the technical details needed to make the evidence seem plausible. On a rainy Thursday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Sarah's termination, FBI agents arrived at Meridian Tech with federal warrants for the arrest of Tom Rodriguez and Rebecca Walsh. Tom was in the middle of another failed attempt to demonstrate the Phoenix system to a potential client when agents knocked on the conference room door. The look of confusion and growing terror on his face as they read him his rights was witnessed by a dozen Meridian Tech employees and the bewildered client representatives. Rebecca was arrested at her desk while reviewing personnel files. The sight of the VP of Human Resources being led away in handcuffs sent shockwaves through the entire company. The arrests made the local news that evening and the trade publications by morning. The story had everything journalists loved: corporate intrigue, betrayal, and a spectacular downfall. But more importantly for Sarah, the news coverage included the FBI's statement that their investigation had completely exonerated her and confirmed that she had been the victim of an elaborate frame-up. David Morrison called Sarah personally that afternoon. "Sarah, I owe you an apology that I can't possibly express adequately." His voice was heavy with regret. "We failed you completely." Sarah was silent for a long moment. "You didn't just fail me, David. You threw away 8 years of my dedication based on fabricated evidence. You destroyed my reputation and my career because it was easier than doing a proper investigation. I know, and I know that sorry doesn't repair the damage we've done. No, it doesn't. We'd like to offer you your position back, with a promotion to VP level and full back pay for the time you've been away." Sarah had been expecting this call, but she had already made her decision. "I appreciate the offer, but I won't be returning to Meridian Tech." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Sarah, I understand you're angry." "I'm not angry anymore, David. I'm disappointed. A company that would treat a dedicated employee this way based on fabricated evidence isn't a company I want to work for." 3 days later, Sarah received another call, this one from Janet Liu. "Are you ready to get back to work?" Janet asked without preamble. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm offering you the position of Chief Technology Officer at Titan Systems. It's a lateral move in terms of responsibility, but the compensation package is 40% higher than what you were making at Meridian Tech." Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: excitement about the future. "There's one condition," Janet continued. "We're launching a competitive product to Phoenix next year. I need someone who understands enterprise transformation systems better than anyone else in the industry." Sarah smiled for the first time since her termination. "I think I can help with that." The irony was perfect. Tom had destroyed Sarah's career to steal credit for Phoenix, only to discover that he couldn't make it work without her. Now Sarah would be leading the development of a competing system, one that would be built correctly from the ground up, with all the knowledge she had gained from the Phoenix Project's successes and failures. 6 months later, Sarah was settled into her new role at Titan Systems, leading a team of brilliant engineers in developing what would become the industry's new standard for enterprise data management. Her reputation had not only been restored, but enhanced by the way she had handled her vindication with grace and professionalism. Tom Rodriguez had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and computer crimes. His reputation in the tech industry was destroyed, and no respectable company would hire him upon his release. The ambitious young man who had thought he could shortcut his way to success had instead guaranteed his professional destruction. Rebecca Walsh received a similar sentence and lost her career in human resources entirely. The woman who had spent years resenting Sarah's success had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting jealousy drive decision-making. Meridian Tech struggled to recover from the scandal. The Phoenix Project was eventually completed, but it never achieved the success that Sarah's original vision had promised. The company's reputation suffered, several major clients terminated their contracts, and the stock price dropped by 30%. David Morrison resigned under pressure from the board, taking responsibility for the crisis in leadership that had allowed the fraud to occur. Most satisfying for Sarah, though, was a small news item that appeared in the industry publications 8 months after her vindication. Meridian Tech had quietly approached Titan Systems about licensing their new enterprise data management platform, the system that Sarah was now leading. Sarah read the article while sitting in her corner office at Titan Systems, looking out at a view that was remarkably similar to the one she had enjoyed at Meridian Tech. But everything else was different. Her team trusted her completely, having seen how she had handled adversity with integrity. Her superiors valued her not just for her technical skills, but for her character. And she had learned valuable lessons about reading people's true motivations and protecting herself from those who might see her success as a threat. She thought about Tom and Rebecca, about the moment when they had thought they had won. How satisfying it must have been for them to see her escorted out of the building, believing they had successfully destroyed her career and stolen her achievements. They had never imagined that their own incompetence and the weight of truth would ultimately destroy them instead. Sarah had learned that karma wasn't mystical or magical. It was simply the natural consequence of actions taken and choices made. Tom and Rebecca had built their success on lies, fraud, and betrayal, a foundation that was always going to collapse eventually. Their downfall hadn't required Sarah's revenge or intervention. It had only required time for the truth to emerge and for their own character flaws to be exposed under pressure. The real victory wasn't in their punishment, though that had certainly been satisfying. The real victory was that Sarah had emerged stronger, wiser, and more successful than ever before. She had maintained her integrity throughout the ordeal, had built an even better career, and had gained the knowledge to protect herself from similar betrayals in the future. As she closed her laptop and prepared to head home to the life she was rebuilding, Sarah reflected on how different this ending was from what Tom and Rebecca had planned. They had given her 2 days to leave, confident that they had destroyed her future. Instead, they had freed her to find something better, while ensuring their own destruction. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the universe had a sense of poetic justice that no human revenge could possibly match. All she had needed to do was maintain her dignity, gather the truth, and let karma do the rest.